Yeah, Friday! Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you may be listening. Thanks for making me part of your day. This is episode 240 of the Ranting Weight Watcher podcast. And before we get started, I want to just talk about the workshops. If you are part of Weight Watchers right now and you're looking for a home workshop, listen, Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Coach Sophie F. It's a great group, a great workshop. It's my favorite workshop. I'm there every Saturday morning, and if it's something you're looking for, if you're looking for a home base, a home place to show up every Saturday morning so that you can reset the mind and get focused back on the next coming week, right? That's going to be the place to be. Coach Sophie F, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you say hello to Coach Sophie and to me if you see me in there. All right. Enough of that. Let's get into this. Journey updates. So I am down this week, second week in a row. Down 1.8 pounds. So my current weight is 215.2 pounds. That's total pounds remaining to get to my 200-pound loss goal of 19.6 pounds. My current stats are going to go from the week of June 29th to July 5th. Total steps taken in that time period, 91,720 steps. That's an average steps per day of 13,103 steps per day. Total miles walk is 39 miles. That's an average mileage per day of 5.5 miles per day. So overall, a pretty good week. Can't complain. I am on to the next week of fasting. My fast starts tonight, actually, going into Friday. So it's Wednesday as we speak. My last meal was just a few hours ago. And so the fast will go till Friday night, and that's where we'll go from there. It's nice to, when it doesn't feel so overwhelming, you know. The more you do it, the more regular it becomes, the more it's not such a big deal anymore. And that's really what it all becomes about. When all of these behaviors that bring success become a natural part of your life, it's going to just get easier and easier, right? And it's not because what you're trying to do became any less difficult. It's because your ability to do it became better, right? And that's essentially why consistency brings success more than perfection. That's kind of what I want to talk to you about today. I know I harp on about this. I know I talk about this way too often. At least I feel like I do. But I feel like I need to pound it in your head often enough and loud enough, because if you say something often enough and loud enough, it becomes truth. And if the news media can use that to spread lies as truth, I can certainly use that same method to spread truth as truth, right? But consistency brings success, not perfection. And so many of us suffer from this week after week, year after year. It just goes on and on. It never stops. It's like deeply ingrained in deep in the brain that this life has to be perfect. Otherwise, it's unsuccessful. It's failure. And it really doesn't matter how many times I say it, because your belief is your belief. Your belief is going to trump what I am saying 9 times out of 10. Okay? Unless you can connect it somehow personally. And that's probably why I have to say it so often, is because maybe I said it 10 times. The first 9 times it didn't connect personally. But all of a sudden, the 10th time it connects personally. So I have gone crazy with consistency and try to make it part of every aspect of my life. And I really have this journey to thank, and really I have God to thank for making me realize it, okay? You guys know how I built the whole system. You know that I was introducing exercise into my life and trying to create a method to gauge success in introducing it. And that gave birth to the Checklist Challenge. And you know that you can go to the rantingweightwatcher.com and you can download a PDF copy of essentially the skeleton of the Checklist Challenge. You can use that method to introduce consistency in your life for anything. And that's essentially the method of what I did to create consistency in exercise. And so I just made it broad scale. I made it so that no matter what part of your journey you're in, you can start somewhere, right? If you're brand new today, the Checklist Challenge is going to get you started. If you're somewhere in the middle, the Checklist Challenge will get you to wherever you need to be. If you're not consistent enough and you really want to start from, basics, back to basics, and really start to build consistency, the Checklist Challenge works for that too. It really doesn't matter how long you've been doing this. It matters that you can confidently say. So when it's all aligned up here, that's when no one can take it away from you. And that's when you realize, holy crap, everything he's been saying is right. But you have to build it. You have to, in order for you to know what I'm talking about to be truth, you have to start to build it and then understand that of what consistency reveals to you and what the kind of wisdom it creates in the process is invaluable. You can't put a price on it. I'm going to try and help you grasp all of that today. I'm going to use the story from the Bible about David. Now, we most of us already know this story, but bear with me. I promised you it'll be all, God willing, it's all going to come together in this nice bow, and it'll all work out, and you'll understand why I'm talking about it. So, the prophet Samuel was searching for a man to anoint to make him the next king of Israel. And he was going under God's instructions to go search for this man. And it brings him to David's family. When he gets there, he talks to the head of the house. And he says, essentially he's telling him, God told me to come here. I'm going to anoint someone here that's going to become the next king of Israel. So he has a big family, and he lines up all his kids, all except one, really. And that's kind of where David's story starts. David is mostly overlooked. He doesn't have much size to him. He's not a very impressive figure. I mean, he's got good looks, but he's not somebody you would be picturing as a king. So his father essentially lines up all his brothers and never even bothers with David. he's figuring in his own head, these sons look like they could be kings, but not David. So overlooked by his own family. Anyway, so the man is looking at each child, and he's saying, no, it's not him. No, it's not him. And the Holy Spirit is telling him, no, this is not the one. No, this is not the one. And he comes to basically the end of the family. And he says, surely there's got to be someone else, because nobody else is here. And he goes, well, my youngest, but he's tending the sheep. He's not here right now. And so Samuel tells him, go get him. Bring him here. And Samuel waits there while they go get David. And when they bring David, right away, he recognizes, this is the man I'm here for. And so he does his thing. He anoints him. He declares that he's going to be the next king of Israel and prays over him and whatever else he does. I'm paraphrasing the story, so forgive me that it's not perfectly detailed. But he does whatever he needs to do. Whatever God is telling him to do, he's doing. And so David in this moment is like, well, what do I do now? And essentially, he says, well, go back to doing what you were doing. I was just here to do this. This is what God told me to do, and I'm doing it. So essentially, he just got anointed and prayed over and told he's going to be the next king. And then right after that, they told him, okay, now go back to shepherding. When I read that part, I said to myself, how many people could have heard that they're about to be king or queen or whatever the case, and then go back to being a shepherd in the same afternoon? How many could have done that? And we live in such an entitled world. How many people would have had the what's the word? The humbleness? Is that the word? I think that's the word. How many people would be humble enough to have somebody pray over them, anoint them, and declare that they're the next king of Israel, and then go back to tending the sheep? I mean, we live in a world that people will pay to have a membership to a weight loss program, and they feel entitled enough to say, I don't want to bother with tracking. I'm a member. I'm a member. I pay to be a member. I shouldn't have to track. That's boring. That's for other people to do. I don't need to do that. What do you mean weigh and measure? I pay to be a member. I should just pay to be a member. I should show up every week. And the scale should go down just because I pay to be a member. I shouldn't have to do all this other nonsense. Tracking, weighing, and measuring. What is that? Who's got time for that? That's the entitled nature of this world. You might be laughing. You might be thinking I'm crazy right now. But I've heard people. I've sat in plenty of workshops, whether it's in studio, whether it's in virtual, and they're all telling you what they're not willing to do. And I purposely say it that way because they say I can't, and they overuse that four-letter word like it's their job. No, the real word is I won't. And in reality, you do what you're willing to do. Everybody does. That's not exclusive to anybody in particular. That's everyone. Everybody does what they're willing to do. And that's all part of the process. So the question becomes, why was David sent back to be a shepherd? Why, as a paying member of Weight Watchers, do you have to track? Hold on, I'm getting there. See, God knew that one of David's biggest challenge ahead of him was Goliath. How many times have I talked to you guys about doing things in baby steps, small steps, doable things that you can do over long periods of time? This is how consistency is created. Doing something you know you can do over a longer period of time, and then after that period of time ends, you add more to it. Right? This is where I came up with the method of doing things in 8-week increments, because you decide what you can do, not decide what you can't do, because everybody decides what they can't do. I'm talking about what can you do? How often can you do it for the next 8 weeks? David had to face Goliath. That was going to be his first major real test. So the day they showed up, was he going to be able to face Goliath that day? No. In reality, he wasn't able to face Goliath. If you were just looking at him, I'm not saying that the story is not true. What I'm saying is, if you were a bystander looking at him and you looked at Goliath, now the height of Goliath, it's said to be like 9 feet tall. Okay? He was giant. And when you saw, in spite of his, he had good looks and everything else, but he was no man of size. So what did he have to do? God knew he couldn't face Goliath that day. So God gave him a bunch of little Goliaths. How many Goliaths did I really face? Let's think about that for a second. The day I started, I told you guys, I started on Saturday, January 12th, 2019. My ritual Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings were to wake up at 5 a.m., pop on my favorite movie, because I would be the only person awake in the house for the first 3 hours of the day. So from 5 to 8 was mine. The TV was mine. I could do whatever I wanted. I brew a pot of coffee, and I would just eat cookies until I finished the coffee. And then at 8 o'clock, when everybody came down, I would eat my real breakfast. See, that everything that happened before that, that wasn't real breakfast. That was my first Goliath. You understand? You understand now? We all have Goliaths. We have to decide which ones we have the faith to conquer when we start. And then once we conquer that one, we go after the next Goliath. Well, why do I have to do that, Don? I should just be a paying member and watch the weight fall off of me and not change anything about who I am. It's normal to be an emotional eater. Everybody's an emotional eater. I shouldn't have to deal with it. Everybody should adapt it so that I feel normal. So, you ignore the small Goliaths. You then ignore the chance for growth. You ignore the challenges that you face. Because it just should be easy. It should be effortless. You're willing to do anything so long as it doesn't make you uncomfortable. And then we have David. As a shepherd, he's defending his flock. He's defending them by whatever wildlife would show up. When you own wildlife, or when you own animals, predators show up, right? It's like one of my dreams to, like those big koi ponds. Like I would love to have a backyard and have one of those big, dig a hole in the ground, make a really nice, and have like an oasis in your backyard of, to see these beautiful koi that are like, end up being like 3 feet long, and they're swimming in what looks like a natural pond, right? And you create this oasis of peace and tranquility. And whenever I would do the studies of how do you do this, what's entailed, right? Never mind just digging a hole in the ground, because that's obvious, right? But what else is entailed? And one of the things that was entailed that I thought was weird was know the predators in your area. And when I was very heavy into the aquarium hobby. And so when you become heavy into things, you join web forums and everything else. So you become part of groups that talk about and help each other do whatever they're trying to do. And so I joined a bunch of forums that had people making koi ponds. Not that, I didn't have a backyard, but it didn't make me not want to know how to do it, right? Not having what I needed, the most essential thing, being a backyard or even a place in the front yard to do it, didn't stop me from wanting to know. And so the list of things, on that list of things that you should know before you started, was to know the predators in your area. And I thought this was really weird, and I said to myself, there's no predators in my area. And someone joked with me, and they said, there's no predator in your area, set up a pond and you'll see. And that's when they all show up. And I thought it was very peculiar, but then you start to hear the stories of the people, and they discover what kind of wildlife is in the area because they would set up a simple koi pond. But here we have David, who is taking care of sheep. Think of them as koi fish, right? On land. So he's taking care of them, and he's encountering and protecting them from every single predator that shows up. Every one bigger than the next. Every challenge, he becomes stronger and has more wisdom and has less fear. In the process of all this, he gets a bit of a reputation or whatever, because he is a harp. He plays the harp. And the king of the time, the current king, was having like anxiety issues or whatever because of Goliath. So someone tells him about David's ability to play the harp. And he invites David into the palace to be a harp player. And so David goes from being a shepherd in this moment to being a harp player. Now he's so good at what he does because he used the harp to calm the sheep. And so the king becomes so attached to, he's a great harp player or whatever, and he feels himself, relaxing because of it. He garners favor in the palace because of his abilities, and finds himself friendly with a lot of the military leaders in the palace. And he hears them all talking about the danger that is Goliath. And so something is going on out there. And essentially, he hears that Goliath is challenging the Israelites. he's challenging that, he's saying, find me someone that I can battle with. And they're all just, he's sitting there mocking our God, right? Essentially in this time. And he's saying no one can defeat me, all these things. And so at this moment was essentially David's moment to take the first step toward becoming king and to proving his courage in the process. Not only his courage, but also the faith it would take and how godly of a man he was. He knew, where everyone else was scared of this 9-foot man because of what he could do to them, he knew that his God was bigger. Why would he know that and not the other people around him? They all served the same God. Because he did consistently whatever it takes to have a godly life. He had a consistent relationship with God. So because he had that consistent relationship, he also had stronger faith than everybody else. And he had no reason not to believe that his God can take this man down. So he begins to stand up to him. And when his family was trying to stop him from doing this, the king was trying to stop him from doing this, the military leaders were trying to stop him from doing this, and when he couldn't be stopped, they tried to give him armor. And the armor was weighing him down. He couldn't even lift the sword. And he's like, I don't need it. The protection that man made is nothing to the protection of God. So he says what he needs to say to Goliath, and Goliath is laughing. He had 5 stones in his pocket and a sling. That's all he had. Put 1 stone in the sling and he started getting ready to throw it. And when he threw it, it was obviously divinely directed, right? Hit the exact spot in between the eyes it needed to hit to bypass all of the armor that Goliath had on. Hit him between the eyes and he dropped dead. And then for good measure, I believe he cuts his head off too, if I remember correctly. So you think like, okay, this is how he becomes king, right? No, because then his life changes even more. Because the encounter with Goliath at that moment was just the beginning, really. That was just the first big test. Now, if I go back to what I was saying before, how many things that have you done and conquered in this journey? But how many of them have been Goliaths? You heard me talking about your attachments to sugar. You heard me talking about emotional eating. You heard me talking about all kinds of things. The way we gloss over how we misuse food over how many weeks and weeks and weeks. You hear me talk about this regularly. We live in a society that normalizes your inability to cope and use food. You abuse food so that you can cope with your problems. They normalize that. Rather than making you understand that your coping mechanism isn't correct, you need a new coping mechanism. Rather than make you understand that, they allow you to believe that it's okay because all these other people are doing it. There's nothing about you that needs to change. When really, it's your Goliath. Whatever it is in that moment, whatever is the most difficult thing in any particular moment, regardless of where you are in your journey, that's your current Goliath. And chances are you're facing that because you can win. Because remember what I said to you before. He didn't anoint David king and then send him to go fight Goliath. He prepared him. He took care of the sheep for however long it took to get stronger, to get smarter, and to have less fear. He faced small Goliaths on the way to the big one. And then when he defeated the big one, he realizes that's only one. And there's going to be many more Goliaths. His next Goliath became the king of that time, because the king of that time did not like how famous David became. He did not like it. He didn't like how the people in the city were essentially praising him. So he sought to have him killed. Because in reality, his son was next in line to be king. But people wanted David just because he killed Goliath. Make a long story short here. He did everything he could to kill him. Instead, he just garnered more and more favor and more favor. He became a military leader in that time. And every time they sent him out to do something, he accomplished it. Battle after battle after battle. He won every single one. Became a renowned military leader. This little old shepherd boy here. One thing after the other, he just kept conquering, kept winning, and kept doing what he did consistently. Having that relationship with God. Doing what he needed to do on a regular basis. This is what he did. Eventually, the king died. And right away, they all wanted David to be king. I'm skipping a lot of details in there. But I like to keep the show under 45 minutes or an hour or whatever. But I could go on probably a really long time about this. But he becomes king in this moment. And the conquering doesn't end when he becomes king. It just continues. He ends up unifying Jerusalem in the process. The whole area becomes unified under one leader, David. He ends up being one of the most greatest kings in the history of that city, of that place. And not only that, but one of the greatest men in God's eyes. But here's one thing about him. As great as the story sounds so far, he wasn't perfect. See how I'm tying that in together now? He wasn't perfect. As a matter of fact, some of the things he did would make you guys look at him twisted. If someone said to you about, and they were pointing at somebody else and saying, that one committed adultery. He slept with that man's wife. And then he got her pregnant. And then he tried to cover that up. And when he couldn't cover it up, he essentially gave a few commands that would make him an accessory to murder and killed that husband. How many would you think that was a good guy? How many would you hear something like that about and then hear that he was a great man in God's eyes? How many would say, what are you crazy? Because even then, you think God chooses perfect people. See, even I learned something from this story. When someone once asked me if God was talking to the group and he was saying something about you, what would he say? That day when I was asked that question, I want to say I don't know if it's the proper word, but I want to say I pissed a lot of people off, or not really pissed them off, but I broke a lot of hearts or whatever. However you want to say it. But if there's one thing I can do, is I can self-reflect. I could self-reflect and I could state it plainly, and I don't have to be beating myself up to do it. But I did. I looked within, and my answer was, if I was God looking at me, I would say, he's got tremendous potential if he would only apply himself. See, in my mind, and that was a long time ago at this point, but in my mind, a man of God needed to be perfect. In order to do God's will, you had to be perfect. Knowing that the only real perfect person to ever walk the planet was Jesus. He's the reason that we're all saved, right? Without his perfection, we all be doomed. But that's what I said. And they were all trying to talk me out of it or talk me through it, around it, or whatever. Reason with it. They asked for a real assessment. They asked me to say what I think God would say. It's not for people to talk me out of it. That was my honest assessment. And I can't honestly say I didn't still think that up until I was studying this story to talk about it for this recording. But when I see that essentially this man is looked at as like the apple of God's eye, whatever, one of the greatest kings ever, and a wonderful man of God. And they actually said a man after God's own heart. That was the words that I read. It wasn't until studying this material that I realized that everything I thought that God thought of me was basically bullshit. It was me projecting that I thought I needed to be perfect to do God's will for my life. Over the past couple of months at this point. Like I do with everything to make something consistent in my life. I mean, this method of creating consistency in my life, I will use it to do anything because it's measurable. And every time 8 weeks goes by, I can look at it and say, I succeeded, I failed at what I was trying to do. And so, however many weeks ago at this point, I decided I needed to make reading the Bible a consistent part of my life. So like I do with everything, I decided, what can I do? So I said I could read for 20 minutes, 3 days a week. Essentially, that's what I did. 20 minutes a day, 3 days a week, for 8 weeks. I read. I even set a timer so I can gauge when I knew when the 20 minutes was up and keep going. I know that sounds very business-like, but this is the way my brain works. This is the way I can measure that I'm doing what I said I would do. 8 weeks goes by in a flash. And I said to myself, at the end of the 8 weeks, I'm going to maintain the 3 days a week at 20 minutes, but I'm going to add 5 minutes of prayer before and after. So I've been doing that now. That's where I'm currently at. I want to say I'm 4 weeks in. But in the process, I decided to give up control of this podcast. And I didn't want to worry about it because, look, when I have to think about what I have to say to you, when I have to think about what ways I can think of or what you're going through in your life, in your journey, what can I talk about this week, all of that is extremely stressful. Especially when I feel like I'm repeating myself. But now, I say, the podcast is yours. Episode 240 belongs to you. You say what needs to be said. Now, I'm not saying that I read this story. It's not true. But for whatever reason, during that 5 minutes of prayer before or after, all of a sudden it just pops in my head, these stories. Now, you've heard how many stories over the past few weeks? And right away, I knew when I thought of David, when David popped in my head, you know the first thing I said to myself, because a lot of the times, something follows it, right? Like when I talked to you a few weeks ago about the woman with the issue of blood, when she popped in my head that day, immediately right after that, the word faith was attached to her. Samson, the story of Samson, the word lust was attached to him. And I made it just kind of fit together, didn't it? We made it, again, God, if I gave control to God, he definitely seems to be doing a good job wrapping it all up together. And when David popped in my head, the term right after that, I said he didn't have to be perfect. Because I knew the story of David. I knew about the adultery. I knew about him trying to cover up the fact that he got this woman pregnant. I knew that he tried to send the husband of this woman into battle, into impossible battles, so that he would die. And I knew that he married her once that man died. I knew all that. So when he popped in my head, the idea that he didn't have to be perfect to be a man of God, a strong man of God, popped in my head. And so it's easy to make that relation because there's so many people that think they need to be perfect in order to lose weight, to become healthy. They think they need to be perfect. So the topic, it just goes together, right? It works. But the one thing I didn't see that also tied in until just a couple hours ago when I was walking before recording here. I was walking and I was listening to his story because I'm finding these wonderful things on YouTube where it is kind of like an illustration. Like, think of a narrator telling the story rather than me reading the Bible, and he's telling it in a way with, with dramatic music, and it makes it easier to remember it. But I find out that the reasons that he was chosen was because of his consistent life. His connection with God was consistent. His relationship with God was consistent. He was always praying to God. He was always praising God. He was always talking and conversating with God. And because of this, he became a great man of God in spite of his flaws. In spite of the adultery. In spite of the murder by association. Did he not pay the consequences? Yes, he absolutely paid those consequences. But because of his consistent relationship, he was still a man after God's own heart. And all I could think of in that moment was when I realized just how consistent David was, I said to myself, what have I been building all this time? And now I'm sitting here and applying it toward how to measure a relationship with God. I'm sure at some point it will take on a life of its own, kind of like everything else did. But for now, it's measurable. And I could say that I'm doing what I said I would do. And that's what's most important. I did not foresee how consistent David was. All I saw was, here's an imperfect man that I could use as an example of how perfection is a delusion. It's not necessary, never will be necessary, and you don't have to be perfect to be successful. And instead, I also found how consistent he was. He is the perfect example of consistency being better than perfection. Perfect example. Really, I don't know that there could ever be a more perfect way to tell you this. I think going forward from this period on out, if you're still holding on to the idea of perfection, I could say now that it's by choice. If you heard this episode 240, and you could still believe that you have to, you messed up, so you'll start again on Monday. I have to be perfect. I messed everything up. I think you have to start understanding that there's a choice involved here. It's a choice to believe you need to be perfect, because it's also an out. It's also an out, because the minute you mess up, you could spend the next 48 hours messing up. Because you messed up on Friday, you're going to go right straight through to the weekend and then start again on Monday. It's your get out of jail free card. Because instead, what you should do, because one of the most amazing things David did that I didn't even touch on was his ability to humble himself and ask for forgiveness when he did all those sins. Immediately, he was repentant. I'm not telling you need to repent because you overate. What I'm telling you is he did what he needed to do to reset everything and get back to work. And with that was repentance. And maybe repentance is part of it for you. Maybe you need to forgive yourself. Maybe you need to realize that it's part of the process, messing up. If you aren't messing up, you're not challenging yourself. That's the God's honest truth. If everything is smooth sailing and you're just successful all the time and there are no storms and it's just sunshine and rainbows and unicorns and leprechauns, maybe you're not challenging yourself. That's not for me to say. It's for me to put it out there. And if you're doing it, maybe you're grabbing at this right now. But maybe you are. Maybe you're only doing what doesn't make you uncomfortable. Maybe that you know like I said last week, the boundaries, the barriers that we allow to live in our lives because it just seems so difficult. It's a Goliath so big. We're terrified to take it on. Terrified of a possibility of life without some sort of food because we know we have an abusive relationship with it. So you rather go on living with the boundaries, living with the barriers, and holding on to them like they're the most important thing in your life. Holding on to the bad things, the things you know trip you up over and over and over again. Because somebody tickles your ears and says everything's on the table. You don't have to give anything up. Meanwhile, they enjoy all the money you're paying them. Of course they're going to tell you everything's on the table. It's good business for them to help you cause your own problems, for them to encourage you to keep barriers and blockade and anchors in your life, and for them to make you think it's normal to abuse food for coping mechanisms and not to fight the real fight, the real Goliath, the thing that made you cause to turn to food. The key to becoming the best version, the man after God's own heart, the female after God's own heart, for you, the key to all of it is for you to do the one thing you're most afraid to do. That's how you become the greatest version of yourself. And that is that person at the end of that, whatever pain comes from then, will make you who you are. I love each and every one of you. God bless you all.